accepted, and there's many reasons for that, and we can get into that too. But most people that follow these 4 words, alienology, cosmology, ufology, and psyops, we also have another one called phenomenology, and another one, pyramidology. So normally, if I would have had room, I could have put phenomenology and pyramidology, because the ologies sort of go together. Alienology, cosmology, we usually put in pyramidology and phenomenology. Phenomenology, we do it by alphabetize it, so we put phenomenology prior to pyramidology and then cosmology. But I wanted to get psyops in there, white, gray, and black, and how it's being used in today's what they call the no news, new news, misinformation, disinformation, and misinformation, disinformation, and information are the 3 Ds. And I think what the President of the United States calls it's not news or it's fake news. And what is reported via the old ones, the old guys, were ABC, NBC, and CBS. But we're under news tonight in public, and so Janet Carroll Lesson and Stephen Colburn, I'm going to try to do my best to share some panel discussions on these words tonight, and then weekly we will choose people or do panels. And then I've got Friday night tomorrow with Ken Johnston, astronaut, and we'll probably will lean more towards engineers and astronauts and government personnel, maybe even John Lear, I don't know, maybe Bob Lazar, I don't know, people like that, forming one thread of truth. And I'd like to get into some of the things that Bob has talked about. And I had one gentleman from MUFON recently call me as experiencer team and asked me if I'd been in Area 41, the Four Corners. I said, of course. So it gets it's not like we're all going to think, because everybody can enter areas for different reasons. And I had different times in my life, in uniform, out of uniform, in a truck and out of a truck, on the back of military equipment or in airplanes. And so it's like peeling away an onion on different words at different times in my life. And there's military time and there's civilian time. Plus, once you get inside the gates, there's wage grade, WGs, there's GS, and then there's in uniform, there's commission, non-commission, and then we have our contractors, and then we have all our civilian personnel through Office of Personnel Management. And this is just like where Janet's at in Hawaii, maybe, because that's where I was trained after I went through here in Florida, then Chicago, and then out of California. I had offices as a civilian in California, Atlanta, Dallas, and New York for at least 5 years. And I had started those while I was still in the government. So it's very, very in-depth, and a lot of people don't understand the difference. So we're going to have to divide it up, all these words, and then whether we're talking in uniform, out of uniform, civilian, contractor. And I believe Janet was hired as a contractor. But now we've been over 25 years now, I think we've decided. And when we did what. And Steve, we don't even know. Steve, you didn't have prior military. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, now we're going to discuss, I guess, where we should start.
My father's been in the military for a long time, but I never was.
So you were discussing that I would be the first generation. So, Janet, is it okay if we start? We've got words here, so I don't know if y'all want to get a piece of paper out or what, Janet, but we'll pass the baton, as Janet and I like to say, or pass the talking stick in our spiritual community. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to do is try to use what Janet and I have learned. And there's just 3 people here, thank God, tonight for right now. It's really hard to discuss more. So, Janet and Steve, where do we want to start? Because we could say we're the first wave. I don't know, but Steve and Janet. Steve, you mentioned something that I was first wave, and Dolores Cannon discusses various people in various Millennium X and all of that, but she's deceased now. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to have to figure out how to talk about the various levels and the time that we've got on the Earth. So, Steve, just mentioned to Janet, and then we can sort of let you lead off, Steve, if you want to.
Well, my information is that the first wave of what I call Class 2 abductees that are genetically modified by the aliens from bloodlines that they're interested in, and trained and used as labor for their agenda. The first wave of them came out around the late 1950s, maybe perhaps 1955 at the earliest. And I was born in 1960, so you may be the one generation ahead of me, if there is one. I thought I was the first generation, but perhaps not. Or perhaps the first generation extends further in time back than I thought. But there have been several generations of Class 2 experiencers since they were first initiated. There's not enough Greys to do what they want to do, and they need to recruit people that are intelligent enough and have the abilities to help them in their agenda.
Janet?
Can I ask? Yeah. I think that Dolores probably, I didn't read Dolores' book, but what I understand, she had the first wave. But it goes back even further when Neil Freer was alive, and he died a few years back, and he was in his 80s. He had been contacted, and same with Ken Johnson. So Ken's in his 70s now, and TJ and I are in our 60s. I came in and I had a lot of contact already in 54. So that may not be quite accurate. I don't know when Dolores is saying is the first wave, but I think it goes back forever that people have been having contact.
Oh yeah, when did she say was the first wave?
I don't know. I didn't read the book.
Yeah, well, there's first, second wave, but it depends. She based it on her work, her research, and she has her own group and her own authorship and her own convention and all of that over in Arkansas. But I believe that it was based on when she started doing research. And since Janet, when I came over in 94 from Hawaii, the first thing my GS-13 government husband did after we got our Cadillac over from Hawaii to California was take me to Dolores Cannon. Now that seems very odd to me. Does it to you guys? Because I didn't even know who she was, and she wanted me to meet her daughter. But don't you think that's strange? Of course, my husband's deceased now. 3 of my husbands that were in the government. One was NASA. Go ahead.
Your husband may be the handler, been somebody that was sent by the government to watch you or guide your path to where they wanted you to go.
Well, yeah, he came to me while I was in personnel information security for a clearance, and they brought me in after I'd already cleared through another husband in 87. And my first husband, I got cleared. Well, let me put it this. See, this is why this is so complicated, folks. Even for me to talk about my husbands, it gets people confused. And now that it's 2019, I understand, now that I reflect on my reality, that very few people have lived the life I did, much less have that many husbands that were all in the government. So, Steve, that's why you being new is very important. Janet knows some, but not all, and because she's worked with me in radio. That's why I told her forget everything she knows, because she knows Tom's stories, but she doesn't know the guy I'm talking about stories. She doesn't know my NASA husband or the one I'm talking about now that you're calling my handler. And yes, there is some truth to that, because with the first husband, I went to a Broadway movie called Goldfinger, and he was in Houston. His name was Stephen Lee Parrish, and he had 5 scholarships, but we went with Stephen Lee Parrish. He and I, before we got married, we were approached by Men in Black. And I believe these were the people, the original people out of Germany. They may have been deep state, X-Files types. The reason is, after many years later, I saw X-Files. I went, that's the guys. They wore black suits, and the one at the end of what happened is we were teenagers. I was 15 and he was 18. And they thought I was graduating, and they were so smart, but I guess they thought I was graduating because I'd been in May '67 in the newspaper with the spinnerets, so it gets relatively complicated. But basically, I was first approached, if I go with Janet's story, if we go back to when we were children, I should even go back to that, Steve. And when this experiencer team person just called me from MUFON to help me with my story, he wants all this, and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have to do this very delicately because it's very, very complicated. Janet and I have been doing radio shows for years and know that we were invested in from those above, or those from the heavens came, or the skies came, or the sky people, or people, our other family. I called when I was young, remembering in a field from my home and having an experience. So my first experience, I don't know if you would call it an abduction or not, Steve. So this is why alien hunters and I haven't done a lot of stuff with the alien contact group or the alien hunters group, and we're separating alien contact and ETs separate because they're treated separately. But my family, so Janet and I will hopefully write our book, and we'll compare the linear timeline. But Janet and I had experiences like roughly everybody does, 4 to 5. And then I died in the 2nd grade, so I left my body and saw angels. And then the next year, I went over to Carlsbad Caverns in White Sands and visited my uncles that worked at Los Alamos. But back with the first husband, back to 67 and seeing Goldfinger, and they asked me and my husband later on as teenagers if we wanted to work for them. And then again, when I had my company, Assured Confidential Investigative Reports, ACR, in 78, they came and visited after my partner was James E. Posey with Investigative Services. He hired me out of the University of Alabama. So while I was going to college, I'd already been in law enforcement and Texas Penal Code and psychology in Alvin College. Now, listen to this, Janet. Back before I started my investigative services with James E. Posey and Assured Confidential Investigative Reports, I was at Alvin Community College where I had my children. I had joined May 10th, the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. But when I was going to college there, Janet, I knew I was going to Hawaii, in which I wound up doing it. Now, I was just a teenager. And I got to Hawaii. A girl came from Hawaii and taught while I was in law enforcement. And after I got out of psychology and law enforcement one evening, she had an area and had her little skirt on to teach dancing. And I politely heard myself say, and I want to get into this with you guys, especially Steve, and, of course, Janet does counseling. But the thing is, I am coming forth in ways of sharing information that I personally am observing with inside myself and the various levels of me and the various levels of education I've had. But because Janet, she had a room, like a little rec center or something, or at the end of the hall. It was a bigger room, like a classroom with no chairs in it. So I don't know if they used it for tumbling or PE or whatever. But I saw her, and I left. Everybody left, and me and the law enforcement officer that taught the class, he had a master's, I guess, in law enforcement. He and I would usually stay. Of course, I made straight A's, but he and I would usually talk shop because I wore a uniform and worked in police. I worked at Pearland Police Department dispatching, and that's the big machine. Where the the phone system, okay, dispatch, right? And so they weren't government yet. They weren't civil service when I was there. So they were just within that time frame, within that 2-year period I was there. They started they were going to go to civil service test. That was a big deal, so we were talking about that. But for some reason, I was drawn down there. And then I walked in, opened the door, and there was the girl. And fortunately, we were just letting out, so they hadn't started yet. But I saw some, girls come in and ask her, and she said, "No, you don't get credit for this. It's extracurricular or something." And I think she charged for it. But I told her, I said, "Well, I'm going to be going to Hawaii." And I don't. And she said, "When?" I said, "I don't know, but I know that I'm going to be going to Hawaii."